Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story of survival that's colder, harsher, and more human than most. Not about kings or castles, but about the people who lived in their shadows. The medieval peasants who faced years of rain, hunger, and biting cold during the Great Famine of 1315. These were the quiet heroes of history, people who outlasted the storm with nothing but grit, instinct, and each other. They shared body heat under rotting roofs, stuffed cracks with straw, and turned scraps into supper, not because they were strong, but because there was no other choice. No firewood, no meat, no warmth, just willpower soaked through with mud, and yet, somehow, they endured. Now, dim the lights. Let the silence settle, and let's step back into the long winter of the past. You wake up before the sun, not because you want to, but because the roof's leaking again. A cold drip right between your eyebrows, nature's version of an alarm clock. You grunt, roll over, pull the straw cloak tighter, and realize it's damp. Of course it is. Everything's damp, including you. It's spring, technically. But the wind still punches like February, and the rain hasn't taken a break in weeks. The priest keeps calling it a season of rebirth, but he said that while literally wringing out his sleeves at the altar. So yeah, Divine Mercy isn't trending. Nobody says the word famine yet, but everyone's eyebrows twitch when you mention the crops. The rain started back in March. At first it felt like a gift. Winter had been long and petty. You lost a few chickens and a pig to the frost, so when the snow melted and the drizzle showed up, you dared to hope. Hope didn't last. The drizzle became downpours, one after another after another. Now the ground squishes when you walk. The brooks overflowed half the village fields, and your barley seeds? Gone. Just gone. Washed off like crumbs on a plate. The oat patch is under 2 inches of swamp water. The kindlings grown fur. Even the grain bins smell like a cheese that lost its will to live. And it's only April. You try to dig anyway. The spade gets sucked in like it owes the earth money. Pulling it back out takes a prayer, and most of your spine, the soil doesn't crumble. It clings. Like it knows you're desperate and it's enjoying it. Thomas from next door broke his plow trying to muscle through the muck. Said he'd fix it on the next dry day. That was 2 weeks ago. Still waiting. The animals are in a similar mood. The goats won't eat. Their hooves are soft from standing in soup, and one of them walked sideways yesterday like it had wine for breakfast. The chickens look like they've given up on life entirely. They haven't laid in days. The cow's coughing loudly. You'd take her to the healer, but that costs money, and she might just outlive you anyway. Your wife stares into the grain sack twice a day now, not to count it, just to check it's still there. She doesn't talk much. Neither do the kids. Even the dog whines instead of barking. Church still happens, mostly because routine is easier than hope. Father Arnaud looks like he's aged 10 years, preaches about divine suffering while sneezing into his sleeves. Says the rain is God's way of keeping us humble. You nod. Then go home and peel off your wet boots with fingers that don't bend properly anymore. The baker's cart was empty yesterday. Said the flour got wet. Tried to make something anyway, called it a barley cake. More like a barley brick. Sold it for half a coin, and people still lined up. You bought one. Broke it in half like a relic and took it home. It tasted like old hay and sadness. The kids chewed it anyway. You haven't said it aloud, but you've been keeping track of the rain. On the doorpost, a little scratch for each morning. The ground still squelches and the sky still spits. 23 marks now. Nobody says the word famine, but the moldy bread and broken boots are doing all the talking, and it's still raining. You've stopped checking the fields in the morning. There's nothing new to see, just puddles, grey skies, the same broken row of cabbages struggling to stay upright in the mud. The soil smells sour now, like it's rotting from the inside out. You used to dream about a good harvest. Now you just hope for a dry day. One single dry day. You'd build a shrine to the sky if it would stop crying for 24 hours, but the clouds hang heavy, full of spite, always just about to break, and then they do, again and again. The road to the village is worse than the fields. Boots sink halfway to the ankle. Carts get stuck. Twice this week, old Mathis had to push his donkey out of a ditch. He ended up carrying the sacks himself. Said the donkey gave up halfway and sat down in protest. You don't blame it. Everything feels heavier now. The air, the mud, the silence, even the firewood smokes instead of burning, as if it too has had enough. You try to keep the children busy. Idle hands lead to too many questions. But it's hard to make chores feel like purpose when the world outside the door is slowly falling apart. You sent them to collect firewood yesterday, but they came back early with wet branches and muddy shoes. Said they saw Thomas and his wife arguing in the woods. Said she was crying. Said he was holding the axe too tight. You didn't ask more. Last night, a neighbor came by asking for salt. Not much, just a pinch. You gave it to her. Watched her tuck it into a cloth like it was gold. Her eyes looked hollow. Her hands were shaking. You offered bread, but she shook her head. Said it was for her husband. Said he hadn't eaten in 2 days. She didn't say the word either, but it's there. In the way people stare at the sky, in the way they measure their food by the crumb, in the way the blacksmith hasn't lit his forge in a week. You lie awake longer now, listening to the rain on the roof, counting the drops between each gust of wind. Sometimes you hear footsteps outside, sometimes you pretend you don't. You used to hate the sound of the rooster, now you miss it. Because if even the rooster's gone quiet, then things are worse than you thought. And it's still raining. It's planting season. Or it should be. The sky has not yet agreed. You walk the field each morning before sunup, turning the same strip of waterlogged earth with your boot, hoping today it will feel different. It doesn't. It still oozes, slick, and lifeless. The soil is swollen like a corpse in a river, and it smells like one too. Thick, sour, choked with rot. You try anyway. Everyone does. You dig with frozen fingers and scoop seed grain into rows of mud that look more like open wounds than furrows. It feels like burying treasure in a swamp, or burying hope. The first planting drowned in March. The second in April. Now it's May. You have just enough seed left for one more try. You don't say it aloud, but this is the last chance. If it doesn't take now, you'll have nothing to reap come harvest, and nothing to eat come winter. The signs are everywhere. A man in the next village tried to trade a chicken for a half sack of rye seed. No one took the offer. Chickens don't lay anymore. Not reliably. They're sick, or skinny, or both. A few have turned cannibal, pecking each other bloody in the coops. The miller in Belden opened a bag of barley and found it sprouting inside the sack, green tendrils curling like fingers. The monks up the road boiled their stored grain and served it as gruel at the door. One woman said, "Thank you," then vomited in the bushes before she'd finished half the bowl. You can't tell if the rain is slowing down or if you're just getting used to being soaked. Even when the clouds clear, everything still drips. The trees, the fences, your skin. The village well is flooded. The water tastes like iron. The children cough more now, and not just at night. You wrap your youngest in wool during the day, even indoors. There's no warmth left in the stones. The hearth takes an hour to catch, even with dry twigs, not that you have many of those left. You burned the last of the stored firewood on St. Wilfrid's Eve, hoping the smoke would chase the damp from your bones. It didn't. Now you dry sticks on the windowsill and pretend they'll burn tomorrow. And the birds, they're gone. No larks in the hedges, no starlings on the roof beams. You don't know when it happened, only that one day the fields were silent. Even the crows have vanished. You find no eggs, no nests, no feathers. The bees, too, have disappeared. No buzzing, no swarms, Just stillness, like the world forgot how to hum. Thomas says it's a curse. Elfric says it's just weather. Your wife says nothing anymore. You catch yourself counting every meal now. Not just what you eat, what you don't. You break the bread into smaller pieces. You soak it in broth to stretch it. You give the better portion to the children, then lie when they ask why you're not hungry. You boil the lentils twice. You water down the milk until it tastes like chalk. You chew slower, and still the seed sacks shrink. You've used half what you meant to save. You tried to trade for more in the next village over, but they've locked their mill. One of their shepherds was beaten last week after being caught near a grain cellar. No one trusts anyone anymore. And no one's growing anything worth stealing. You hear a rumor that the manor's steward burned 3 sacks of spoiled oats, said they'd sprouted through the burlap, said they were cursed. You would have eaten them anyway. Raw, even. You think about that more often now. Eating the spoiled grain. Eating the seed meant for August. Eating what was never meant to be eaten. You remember your grandfather's saying, "Don't touch the sowing stock unless the snows haven't melted by Easter." The snows did melt, but the hunger came anyway. And the seeds you prayed over in April now lie under 3 inches of stagnant water, fermenting in place. You ask the earth again, just once more. Please. It doesn't answer. There used to be summer. You remember it from years past, the warm breath of June on the back of your neck, the light stretching long into the evening, the scent of sun-warmed grass clinging to your clothes. A season for haymaking, mending roofs, and letting the children run barefoot until supper. But this year, the calendar lies. The sky stays dark, the ground stays wet. It's summer in name only. And the rain still hasn't stopped. You've lost track of the days it's rained. Somewhere after 40, the scratches on the door frame blurred together. The mud outside your cottage hasn't dried since April. Your boots, if you can still call them, that are stiff with damp, the seams bloated and splitting. When you take them off, your feet are pale and wrinkled like meat boiled too long. Your toes smell of mildew. You say nothing. You just press them near the hearth, unlit, and hope the tingling means they're still alive. The pasture looks like soup. There's no grass left, just puddles broken up by drowned stalks and hoofprints. You tried to graze the goats there last week. They refused to move. Just stood there in ankle-deep muck, eyes blank, fleeces grey with wet. You carried one home after it collapsed. It didn't make it through the night. The cow's milk has thinned. You can see it in the pale, watery bluish with little foam. Your wife tried boiling it with barley husk to stretch the taste. The children didn't finish their bowls. They don't complain. They just eat slower. That's the worst part. The quiet. It's become part of everything now, the kind of silence that doesn't need shushing. It's simply there, filling the spaces where questions used to be. You find mold in the grain bins, not just along the edges, not a little. Thick colonies of white fuzz clinging to the barley like frost. You scrape it off and toss a handful into the fire. It pops too damp to burn properly. The rest you keep. You grind it, cook it into mash, stir it into soup. You eat it anyway. You've stopped caring what's edible and what isn't. If it goes down, it counts. 2 piglets were born last week. Neither had eyes. One never breathed. The other squealed once, then went limp. You buried them near the old fence post, where the soil's a little higher. It still took an hour to dig. The shovel made a slurping sound each time you pulled it out of the ground. The sow hasn't moved much since. You check on her daily. She watches you with dull eyes, then lays her head back down. You know the look. She won't last either. The market at the village green was empty today. No apples. No onions. No eggs. A man brought 3 turnips he'd salvaged from a sunken plot. They were soft, blackened at the roots. He wanted half a coin for each. No one paid. He took them home again. The baker hasn't opened in 4 days. The mill's wheel hasn't turned since the creek burst its banks. You heard someone walked to Belden to buy a bushel of rye and was laughed out of the square. Rye? Where? They said. You believe it. There is nothing left to buy. Only things to lose. You still pretend it's temporary. You plant again, you scratch holes in the sludge, and drop soaked oats into them. You pat the ground like it's a sleeping child, and hope this time something grows. But you know the truth now. You've seen the sun twice in 6 weeks. The wind smells like mushrooms and wet wool. The sky has turned, and it's not turning back. There was a time not long ago when everyone still called it a bad year. They said the weather would turn, that every few generations the earth just needed to breathe to remind the faithful who was really in charge. The older ones said they'd seen worse, that the 1280s were cold, or that the winter of 1296 took half the sheep, that this too would pass. But that was in June. It's August now, and no one says that anymore, because whatever this is, it's not passing. It's settling in. You look at the fields and see nothing but soggy failure. The grain never rose. The barley is limp and yellow. The few cabbages that tried to grow were eaten down by rot and slugs. You turn over a beet with your boot. It leaks. The steward from the manor came last week, rode in on a brown horse with dry hooves and a dry cloak. He asked for rent in kind grain, cloth, or livestock. No coin needed, he said. The Lord was merciful. You told him there was no grain. He shrugged. Then pay in sheep. You told him the sheep were dead. He looked at your roof, at your muddy boots, and said, then perhaps sell your roof beams. You didn't answer, just stared at the mud between your toes. He gave you 3 weeks. The baker's loaves are smaller now. They used to feed a household. Now they're barely enough for a child. He says it's the flour, too wet, too coarse. Someone whispered he's mixing in ground bark and ash to stretch it. You believe it. You bought a loaf yesterday, and it tasted like smoke and sand. Still, you ate it. Everyone does. It's not about taste anymore. It's about mass. Anything you can hold. Anything that gives the mouth something to do other than beg. The children are quieter than ever. They sit by the hearth and don't ask for supper. They've learned not to. They watch for you to speak first. You used to love the way they shouted and tripped over each other during mealtimes, loud, sticky-fingered chaos. Now you long for the sound of one child simply asking, is there more? Because if they ask, it means they still believe there might be. Your eldest saw something yesterday. A boy no older than 10, on the road from Edgemore. Clothes too thin, shoes missing. He was holding a clay bowl. He knocked on doors. Politely. Always politely. But he left with nothing. Just walked toward the next village. You don't know if he had parents. You don't know where he sleeps. But you keep thinking about that bowl. Empty, but held with both hands. Like it used to matter. The parish priest has stopped talking about the weather in his sermons. Now he talks about sin, about the price of pride, about gluttony and sloth and God's judgment. He says the rain is penance, that the humble will be rewarded after the trial. Someone in the back of the chapel muttered that their infant hadn't sinned. The priest didn't answer. It's August, and the fields stink. The air has a weight to it now, not just wetness, but decay. You can smell it on your clothes, in your hair, in the bedding. Mold creeps up from the corners. The goat's pen collapsed under the damp last week. No one bothered rebuilding it. They just tied the animals to a post and hoped they wouldn't wander. No one has the strength to chase them. There's a part of you still hoping the wind will shift, that the sky will clear, that you'll wake one morning and find the air crisp, the ground dry, the barley stalks standing tall like soldiers returned from battle. But that part is shrinking, because it's late summer, and the rain hasn't stopped. and you're beginning to think it never will. It's warmer than it has been in weeks. Not sunny, not bright, but there's a softness to the air that almost feels like kindness. The sky is pale, not grey. The rain pauses for a full morning. Birds return, briefly, to the hedges. You hear a lark's call and forget yourself long enough to smile. People step outside. They stretch their backs, push open shutters, carry buckets without dragging their feet. A few even laugh, but no one says it out loud. No one wants to jinx it, because they all know the truth. This is the last warm day, and nothing has changed. You walk the fields in silence. The oats never rose. The barley is useless, soft-headed, water-fat, mouldy under the husks. You find a few sprigs of rye that haven't fallen over. You gather them like treasure. 5 stalks, maybe 6. Not enough for a loaf. Not even a crust. Tomas tries to gather hay from the high meadow. What little there is slimy and black near the roots. He bundles it anyway. "We'll burn it if the goats won't eat it," he says. He's half joking. Maybe. In town, the price of bread rises again. Last week, a farthing bought half a loaf. Today, it buys a quarter. And it's not bread anymore. Not really. It's grey and heavy, stretched with ground-up acorns or split peas or powdered husk. You need 2 cups of water just to chew it. Your teeth hurt afterward. But you still eat every bite. You've started cutting each loaf into exact portions. You draw the knife slowly, like a ritual. 1 for each child, 1 for your wife, 1 for the stew, none for yourself. You tell yourself, it's just for today. You've said that every day since midsummer. You try to gather firewood. The trees near the creek are damp to the core. The wood splits wet. Mushrooms sprout from the bark. You haul what you can, twisted branches, rotten stumps, saplings barely thicker than your thumb, and stack them by the door. A pile of wishful thinking. When the weather turns, you'll need double the fuel to chase off the damp. But half the trees are dead or dying. And so are you. Your shirt has been wet for so long it's grown stiff. You peel it off at night and drape it near the fire pit, but the hearth rarely sees flame these days. The kindling is too wet, the logs too soft. You've started sleeping in your tunic. You haven't felt fully dry since April. You itch constantly along your ribs, under your knees, between your toes. You pick at the skin until it bleeds, then pick again once it scabs. The sores sting when it rains, which is always. You used to bathe once a month. You don't remember the last time now. Water is everywhere, but none of it feels clean. A man came through the village this morning. Thin, hollow-cheeked, boots worn flat at the sole. He was carrying a bundle, 2 wool cloaks, a scarf, and what looked like a fur-lined cap. "Trade?" he said. "Any food?" No one answered. Not because they didn't want to help, because they couldn't. No one has food to spare, and no one's felt warm in months. You watched him walk to the next house. He left with nothing. The wool cap slipped from the bundle as he walked away. You didn't call after him. You just picked it up, brushed it off, and put it in your pocket. It still smelled like ash and sweat, but it was dry. That evening, the wind shifts. It comes from the north. Colder, sharper. You wrap the new cap around your hand and hold it to your face. It's the last warm day, and winter is already watching. It should still be harvest time. The leaves haven't even finished falling, but the wind now carries something mean in its breath, not just chill, but bite. Not enough to freeze the creek solid, but enough to make your teeth ache when you drink from it. Enough to turn the muck in the fields stiff around the edges, like a thin crust of misery hardening over something worse. The ground never dried. It simply turned cold. Frost took the last of the root vegetables last week. You'd left a patch of turnips in the back field, not because you forgot, but because you hoped. Maybe if the sun came out. Maybe if the rain eased up. Maybe they'd fatten and feed your family for one more week. They're gone now. You dug one up and watched it crumble between your fingers, black, soft, hollow, not rot, not exactly, just empty, like something that tried and failed to become food. A few potatoes survived, but they taste like soil. You boiled some, and they dissolved in the water like wet parchment. The children didn't finish their bowls. You didn't ask why. You tried to light a fire with straw this morning. It worked for a minute. The room filled with smoke, your eyes stung, and the fire coughed itself to death. The straw was too wet. Everything is too wet. The smoke still lingers in your home. Your tunic smells like it. Your hair, your bedding. You've grown used to the sting in your nose, the mixture of damp wool, burned chaff, and the faint undercurrent of mildew. It's a village scent now. Everyone smells the same. You wear everything you own now, all at once. 3 tunics, a patched cloak, a second pair of socks with a hole at the toe. Your wife wrapped wool rags around her hands like gloves. The children don't complain about wearing the same clothes day and night. They've learned the weight of fabric is more valuable than its color. You saw a man in the lane yesterday wearing 2 fur pelts tied with rope across his chest. One of them still had a tail attached. He didn't seem to notice. You don't blame him. You'd wear a goat if it kept your knees warm. And still the church demands tithes. You went, like always, not because you believe anymore, but because it's what's expected. The priest stood at the altar wrapped in fox fur and linen, the only man in the village whose robes haven't been patched this year. He read from the same texts as last month. Something about suffering, sacrifice, divine mercy. Then he passed the alms bowl. You dropped in a scrap of copper. He looked at it, then at you. You didn't look back. The air is different now, sharper, hungrier. You feel it when you step outside at dawn, a stillness that says nothing will grow again until spring, and even then only if the gods are kind. You know what happens next. You've seen the signs in the elders' stories. You're not preparing for winter. You're bracing for it. It is no longer hunger that wakes you. It's the cold. A hard, brittle kind that clings to your ribs and settles behind your knees. You feel it before you even open your eyes, wrapped around your spine like something alive. The fire has long gone out, and the hearth is black with last night's failure. You reach for your boots. They're frozen where you left them. So are your fingers. You slide them in anyway. There is work to do. Even now, especially now, you walk to the granary out of habit. There's nothing left in it. 3 weeks ago, there were still sacks stacked near the center of the community store, kept dry with straw and prayers. Old barley, coarse oats, some sour flour. Mold crept in early, but no one spoke of it. You just scraped off the green and used what was left. Every meal came with a cough. 2 days ago, the last sack was emptied. A woman tried to sweep the powder from the corners of the floor. Her child licked it from his fingers. Now, it's just a dark room full of nothing. People still visit, just to look. Then they leave. You don't lock the door anymore. There's nothing to steal. The baker has stopped baking. His last few loaves were the size of your fist, made from ground bark and whatever flour he'd dried near the chimney. They cost twice what they used to, then 3 times. Then someone tried to trade a wool cloak for a single round and was turned away. He said the heat was too dear. And it is. Firewood is precious now. You gather it like coins, stacking wet branches near the hearth and praying they'll dry enough to light. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they hiss and smoke, and your children wheeze all night from the fumes. You'd trade your boots for dry kindling. If anyone had any. You heard a story yesterday. A man from the next village traded his wife's wedding shawl for a small sack of rye. When he brought it home, his brother came by, asked for a share. They argued. The brother left with a broken tooth and a bruised eye. The sack? Half full. The shawl? Gone. No one's sure what's worse, losing the food or becoming someone who would fight over it. You think about it more than you should. The steward came again. Not with requests, with demands. 3 guards this time. Their boots were clean, they carried spears, and their faces were covered. He read from a scroll. All grain must be surrendered, all cellars inspected, all barns inventoried. Anyone hiding food would face punishment. Food is the Lord's gift, he said, and to withhold it is theft. Then he rode back to the manor with sacks you didn't get to see inside. Someone asked where the Lord keeps his wheat. No one answered, but everyone thought the same thing. It isn't here. Last night, your wife boiled the seed grain. Not all of it, just what was hidden, just what was saved for planting the final hope. It was tied in linen, tucked behind the stove. You knew it was there. She knew. You knew. No one had spoken of it, until she boiled it. No spices, no broth, just water, seed, and silence. You drank it like it was wine. Hot, thin, cloudy, but it filled the belly enough to trick your body into peace. The children slept. No one cried in the night, and that's more than you expected. This morning, the dog was gone. You tied him up near the door as always. He doesn't wander. He's old. Blind in one eye. Not much of a guard dog, really, but still yours. Still part of the family. The rope was cut clean. There were no prints in the frost. Just a few drops of blood in the mud, and silence where his bark used to be. You didn't tell the children. You just rubbed the rope between your fingers and hoped the thief had been gentle. That they waited for him to sleep. That he didn't suffer. Because now, even theft has changed. It's not about greed. It's about staying alive. And then, there are the footprints. You found them near the shed. Small, shallow, hurried. Someone had come in the night. The latch was off, the door ajar, 2 potatoes missing, a clay bowl overturned. You didn't shout, you didn't curse, you just cleaned up, and left a crust of bread on the shelf. Not as a trap, not as a gift, just because you understand, this isn't a village anymore, it's a shipwreck. Everyone clings to their own piece of driftwood, hoping the waves won't take them next. No one talks of spring. No one mentions harvest. The word famine still isn't used. Not by the priest, not by the steward, not even by you. But it's here. It's inside the walls. In your bones. In your children's silence. And it's not creeping anymore. It's moved in. You didn't light the fire last night. Not because you forgot. Not because you were too tired. But because there was nothing left to burn. You used the last dry branch 3 nights ago. A piece of beechwood you'd saved behind the hearth for emergencies. You remember placing it there back in October, telling yourself you'd only use it if someone took ill, if frostbite set in, if you truly had no other choice. You used it when the baby coughed blood into his blanket. You used it and it burned fast. Hot, yes, but fast. The warmth reached your feet just as it was already leaving your shoulders. The log was gone in less than an hour. And now there's nothing left but wet straw and cold stones. You've begun to wonder, what else will burn? Water freezes inside the house now. The bowl by the door cracked, splintered, has a rim of ice even at midday. The clay is brittle from months of damp. When you knock it with your boot, it doesn't slosh, it crunches. The spoon inside it froze solid. You pried it out with a knife, then warmed it beneath your armpit until it softened. You used it to stir soup, if you can still call it that. Hot water with 2 strands of onion and some ground up barley chaff. The color is pale gray, the steam barely rises. Still, the children huddle close when it's ready, eyes wide with the kind of hunger that no longer whines or complains. They've stopped asking what's in the pot. They already know. At night, You all sleep in the same bed. There's no space for comfort, only efficiency. The baby between you and your wife, limbs tucked in like a rabbit, your eldest curled around your legs. The middle child lies at your back, arm thrown across your side, shivering even in sleep. The wool blanket, stiff with age and smoke, is tucked tight under your knees and neck, like a sail rigged for storm. It still isn't enough. You wear every piece of clothing you own, 2 tunics, a rough linen shirt, your patched cloak, 2 pairs of socks, and the wool cap from the man who passed through in autumn. Still, you wake with fingers like stone and knees that don't bend until midday. You burned the cradle yesterday, the one you carved yourself 2 winters ago, when your wife was still round with the baby and the world still made sense. It had sat in the corner by the hearth for a year, half full of straw and old blankets, turned sideways as the baby outgrew it. You stared at it for 3 days. Then you took it apart slowly, gently, like it still held something fragile, and fed it to the flames. It smoked, the glue popped in the joints. The warmth lasted long enough for everyone to take off their boots. That was something. The smoke smelled like honey. You didn't cry, but your wife didn't speak to you for the rest of the day. Not because she was angry, because she knew you were right. The chapel is cold now, too. You go, still, everyone does. It's not about faith anymore, it's about habit, about being seen, about proving to yourself and to your neighbors that you are still here, still shaped like a person. Father Henry's sermons are shorter than they were in autumn. He no longer shouts. He reads quietly now, voice thin from cold and hunger. Last week, he spoke of Job and trials of the flesh. This week, he spoke of sacrifice. Then he passed around the alms bowl. No one placed anything inside. Not out of disrespect, but because no one had anything left. Your hands bleed more now. The skin cracks at the knuckles, splits under your fingernails. You rub lard into them when you have any, but mostly you don't. The chill cheeks are red with windburn. Your wife wraps rags around her hands just to cook, though most meals are just boiling water with a hint of something once living. You haven't washed in weeks. There's water, yes, but it hurts too much to touch. You tried 2 nights ago. Melted snow in a pot, soaked a cloth, wiped behind your ears. The cold was so sharp it made your teeth ache. You stopped halfway through. The cloth froze stiff by morning. There was a boy buried last week. You didn't know him well, just one of the neighbor's younger sons. He went out in the early morning to gather kindling and didn't return. They found him kneeling by the fence post, arms full of broken twigs, face pale as ash. His mother screamed so loud it startled the goats. They wrapped him in old sackcloth and dug a hole as best they could in the frostbitten yard. The priest read a verse. The others stayed quiet. Everyone else was thinking the same thing. The boy died gathering firewood. That was the cause of death, and no one questioned it. Some nights, you dream of fire. Not a hearth fire, not warmth, something bigger, wilder, a blaze that roars through fields and villages, devouring everything. You see roofs collapse, windows glow with flame, cattle scream, and trees fall in showers of sparks. And you're not afraid. You're relieved, because in the dream, you are warm. You tell yourself it won't last forever. You repeat the words like prayer, like a curse, but the truth presses into your ribs each night like a frozen hand. Spring is a story, and tonight there is no fire, only breath. The rats are gone. You only realized it yesterday, when your daughter dropped the last crust of stale bread onto the floor, and nothing happened. No scratching, no scurrying, no bold little feet darting from the shadows to claim it. Just silence. The bread sat there for half an hour before you picked it back up, brushed it off, and divided it again thinner this time, like communion. Wide for each child, one for your wife, none for you. In autumn, the rats were a problem. They gnawed through bags, stole from your stores, nested beneath your feet. They ran across your boots, chewed through ropes, left droppings in the grain bins. You hated them. Now, you miss them. Because even the rats have nothing left to eat. The baby is barely moving these days. He doesn't cry anymore, just blinks slowly and sleeps with his mouth slightly open. His hands don't reach out. His legs don't kick. You try to feed him broth, barley water, more warm than filling, but he spits most of it up. Your wife holds him tighter now, longer, even when her arms ache from the weight. She rocks him against her chest and whispers lullabies with no melody. He doesn't listen, but maybe she does. Maybe she's singing for herself. You've begun digging again. Not in the fields. That's pointless. The ground is frozen and dead. But near the tree line, by the edge of the forest, where the snow thins. You dig with a stick, with a flat stone, with your hands, anything to reach the wet roots beneath. Burdock, dandelion, nettle, worms. You found a patch of yellow fungus yesterday. You ate it raw. It tasted like copper and mud. You told yourself it was safe. You told your wife it didn't make you sick. That part was a lie. You were up all night with cramps, groaning so loud the neighbor knocked on the wall. You told him it was a cough. He didn't believe you, but he didn't ask again. At the chapel, the priest rings the bell more softly now. Maybe to save energy. Maybe because he knows no one comes unless they must. His sermons have shifted, fewer promises, more riddles. Last Sunday, he read about the 7 lean years in Egypt and said we must endure like Joseph. Someone in the back muttered, "Joseph had grain." No one laughed. No one argued. The priest didn't even respond, just folded his hands and stared at the altar as if waiting for it to disappear. There's a boy wandering the village alone. You've seen him twice now, no more than 9 years old. Filthy, pale, barefoot in snow. His hair hangs in dirty knots. He doesn't knock on doors. He just walks, looking, searching. For what? You don't know. A mother? A brother? A fire? He stopped near your shed yesterday and stared inside. You thought about chasing him off? Instead, you left a potato on the woodpile and shut the door. This morning, it was gone. You heard someone was caught digging in the grave pit. An old man. They say he was seen pulling bones from a shallow grave and inspecting them, like he wasn't sure how old they were. Like it mattered. They didn't punish him. What would be the point? You think about that man often. You wonder what made him do it. Hunger? Madness? Or just the quiet logic of starvation? Because when there's nothing left in the fields, and the animals are gone, and even the weeds have been boiled to mush, what's left? Your daughter is losing her hair. It falls out in strands when she combs it with her fingers. You find tufts on the bedding, on her shoulders, caught in the seam of her scarf. She's not sick, just hungry, just cold. She hides the clumps in her apron, pretends not to notice. You don't say anything. Neither does your wife. You just sweep them into the hearth and hope she doesn't see. A man burned his bed last night. He said it was better to sleep on the floor and be warm for an hour than to die wrapped in cold wood. You visited his hut and saw nothing left but ash and a few bricks. He lay on straw, wrapped in his coat, staring at the ceiling. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everything about him already said, "I'm done waiting." Someone left a child at the chapel. No name, no note. Just a bundle of rags and a small carved horse pine, roughly whittled, probably made by a father who couldn't keep him. The priest found the child at dawn. Blue lips, stiff fingers. He buried him behind the church. Didn't ring the bell. Didn't say a name. Just covered him in snow. You walked past it today. There's no marker. Just a small drift with 2 sticks crossed into a crooked X. You used to count days. Now you count bodies. Used to look for signs of spring green buds, softer earth, birdsong. Now you look for signs of movement behind doors, smoke from chimneys, footprints in the snow. If you don't see any, you don't knock. You just move on. The dead don't need company. This is late winter. This is the depth. This is the moment the world stops waiting for a miracle. Even the sky seems tired. Even the hunger has grown quiet. And still, the snow falls. Soft, indifferent, like nothing ever mattered. A new year has begun. You know this not because of celebration there is none, but because the priest said so in Sunday Mass, reading the calendar of saints in a voice half hoarse from the cold. There were no bells, no feasting, no new blessings, just another morning of breath fog and cracked fingernails. It is January, and nothing has changed, except that the hunger has grown polite. It no longer growls. It waits. Quiet, constant, bitter as the wind, and behind the manor walls, they are still eating. That is what you hear now. Not rumors, not any more, but actual sounds. The clink of knives on platters, the low murmur of conversation in candle-lit halls, the hollow echo of boots on polished stone floors. A boy from the Smiths family was sent up to deliver kindling. When he returned, he described what he'd seen. Venison on a spit, wine in glass, servants carrying silver trays. He said the Lord's dogs are fatter than most of the village children. You want to think he exaggerated. You know he didn't. The steward returns weekly. He rides in with guards, their cloaks thick with fur, boots waxed against the rot, swords sharpened not for enemies, but for show. They ask for reports. Who still has livestock? Who has seed grain? Who hasn't tithed this month? And when no one answers, they collect what they can see. 2 chickens, thin and mangy, a sack of mouldy oats, 3 bundles of firewood from behind the midwife's shed. Your neighbor tried to hide a turnip under his cloak. They took it, then find him. They find him for stealing from himself. And still, the priest speaks of giving. He asks for charity in the name of God. Asks for faith, and if faith is too scarce, then barley, wool, labor, oil, a prayer whispered into a wooden bowl. He gives sermons with no heat and little hope. He talks about Job, about sacrifice, about obedience. You don't listen anymore. You only go to Mass because it's warmer than home. Because sometimes someone leaves behind a crust in the pew. Because God isn't answering, but maybe someone else will. The markets sell rot now. It's a parade of filth and desperation. A woman with pickled fish bones showing through the skin, eyes glassy with decay. A man selling hunks of hard cheese he claims came from Flanders, though the rind smells of wet cloth and mouse droppings. Stalls hawk jars of grease, grey with age, and dried herbs so brittle they crumble at a breath. Everyone's trading, no one's winning. A boy offered his father's boots for a half-loaf. He got a scrap of barley cake, green around the edges, and he smiled, because it was something. There are whispers of grain caravans from the south. You hear them at the well, in the corners of the chapel, behind cupped hands. They say 10 wagons pass through Yorkshire. I heard a merchant paid 5 shillings for a single sack of rye. They're selling only to the nobles. You want to believe the grain exists. You don't believe it will ever reach you. Someone mentions bandits raiding one of the carts last week. You imagine starving men with clubs ambushing guards in the snow, tearing open sacks, weeping at the sight of real food. You can't decide if you pity them or envy them. Both, maybe. The Lord's manor is lit every night. You see it from the hill, the glow of torchlight behind stained glass, the plume of smoke curling steady and thick from the chimney. The guards pace the outer wall, spears in hand, eyes sharp. They don't look hungry. You saw one spit a peach pit into the snow. A peach. In January. You tried not to think about it. You told yourself it was a figment, a dream conjured by hunger. But your son saw it too, and he asked you very quietly, "What does a peach taste like?" You didn't remember. You just said, "Sweet." The worst part isn't that they eat. It's that they eat where you can see them. That they wear warmth while you shiver. That their dogs are fed scraps better than anything you've tasted in weeks. That their fields lie dormant while your bones do not. That they still say God wills this. That they still ask you to be patient. That they smile behind iron bars. And that you frozen, filthy, and nearly hollow still bow when they pass. It starts with a quiet that doesn't lift. The kind that fills a home like fog seeping into corners, curling under doors, wrapping around ankles as you try to move. The kind that only comes when the crying has stopped. When the little ones no longer beg, no longer whimper, no longer even breathe heavily in their sleep. One day you wake up and the hut is too still. You count your children like always. 1, 2, 3. But something in the air tells you it won't always be 3. The babies are the first to go. Their bodies are too small to fight the cold, their stomachs too tender to handle boiled roots and acorn paste. They don't cry for long. They go quiet by degreesless whimpering each day, then long stretches of sleep, then nothing at all. You feed your youngest with a soaked cloth now. Dip it in warm broth, press it to his lips, hope he sucks. Most days, he does not. Your wife still hums lullabies while rocking him. Not for the baby. For herself, the village is emptier now. Not from people leaving there's nowhere to go, but from people vanishing. Mostly children. It happens slowly, like the tide going out. One day the lane is full of barefoot kids dragging sticks through the mud. The next, only 1 or 2 remain, too thin for their age, too quiet for comfort. Some were buried. Some weren't. No one talks about the ones who disappeared at night, bundled in rags and taken into the woods by parents who returned with empty arms and blank expressions. You saw a man yesterday, just standing in the rain, holding a child's shoe. He didn't move for hours. They've started digging graves behind the chapel wall. The old cemetery is full too full, the priest says. He offers blessings, but not space, so they dig behind outbuildings now, behind stables, even in the commons. They dig wherever the ground is soft enough. The new graves are smaller, no names carved into the wood. Sometimes no wood at all, just a stone, just a memory, just silence. Your neighbor lost both daughters last week. Fever, he said, though he didn't look you in the eye when he said it. He buried them by the fence, side by side, with a spoon between them. It was their favorite silver, once shiny. He hasn't spoken since. You brought him broth the next day. He didn't answer the door. You left the bowl on the step. It was still there this morning, frozen solid. There are whispers about infanticide now. No one says the word aloud. But it's in the glances people give the mother with too many children and too little bread. In the way they look when someone returns from the woods with red eyes and trembling hands and fewer mouths to feed. There's no judgment, just resignation. Because everyone knows what it's like to weigh a baby's life against your own survival and lose. And because the part no one says is this, it's not always a choice. Sometimes it's just the last terrible mercy. Children wander alone now. A girl knocked on your door yesterday. She was 5, maybe 6. No shoes, dress torn, cheeks hollow. She didn't ask for food. She just looked up at you and said, "Mama's gone." You brought her inside, gave her broth, let her sit by the hearth. She fell asleep with her head against your knee. Your wife tucked a blanket around her. When you woke the next morning, she was gone. Took the blanket with her. The church bell no longer rings for the dead. There are too many. The priest says prayers over handfuls of earth now. Sometimes he just nods, gestures, mutters something beneath his breath, and sprinkles a pinch of ash. He says, children go to heaven first, that their pain is brief, their reward eternal. But he says it with tired eyes and shaking hands. And sometimes you think he says it for himself, because his niece was one of the first to die. Your daughter lost a tooth 2 days ago. You told her it meant she was growing. She didn't smile, just placed it in your palm and curled her fingers over it. She's 8. She hasn't played in weeks. Used to love jumping puddles. Now, she just sits, watches the window, counts the birds. There aren't many. Birds know when to leave. The world is quiet now. No games in the lanes, no shrieks from the fields, no running, no laughter, no shrill questions about spring. The children vanish first, because they are light, because they are still soft, because they don't understand how long this winter truly is, and because, in a world built on hunger, innocence is the first thing to die. It happens so slowly that you almost don't notice it. The first thing to go isn't the bread or the livestock, not the firewood or the tools, not even the children. It's the part of you that says, I would never, because by now, you've watched good people do things they swore they'd never even think about. You've done some of them yourself. You've stood with mud on your knees, holding a turnip that belonged to someone else. You've taken food from a sleeping hand, lied and nodded and looked away. And so when they say someone dug up a grave last night, you don't even flinch. You just ask, quietly, did they find anything? It starts with theft, petty at first, a missing pail, a chicken gone from its coop, a handful of oats lifted from a sack. You don't blame them, you almost feel relief that someone's bold enough to take, that they're still trying, but it escalates fast. A man breaks into his brother's hut and steals the last of the winter grain. A boy slits the throat of a neighbor's goat and disappears into the woods with the carcass. A woman finds her husband hoarding potatoes in the wall and breaks his arm with a broom handle. They used to call it sin. Now it's just survival. You saw it happen once, with your own eyes. A man rifling through a fresh grave, not even waiting for the moon to rise, just knee-deep in mud, hands raw, tossing aside clumps of earth with wild desperation. You should have stopped him. You didn't. You stood there and watched as he pulled the body out, peeled back the shroud, ran his fingers along the ribs. He found nothing. He wept. And still you watched, because part of you wanted to know what he'd do next. Cannibalism is a word no one says aloud, but it's there, in every conversation, in the pauses, in the way people look at each other after someone disappears, in the way no one questions the stew that smells a little too rich, or the sudden appearance of meat when no animals remain. The priest won't talk about it, but last week a man came to confession and didn't leave, not because he was forgiven, because he collapsed at the altar and never got up. They buried him behind the chapel. No prayers, no cross, just a hole and a shovel and silence. Superstition is back. It rises like steam from the rot. You find herbs tied to door frames, dolls made of straw and bone hanging from rafters, women whispering charms over bowls of rainwater, men carving runes into their boots, praying to gods their grandfathers feared. A boy was born with a crooked foot, and someone said it was a curse. 3 days later, the house burned down. No one asked how. They just nodded, said, that's what comes of letting witches live too close. You caught your wife staring at your hands while you slept. Not in fear, not in love, just staring. You didn't ask why, because you know, you've done the same. When she coughs too hard, when her skin looks too pale, when her portion stays untouched by the fire, you wonder, how long? The dogs are gone, eaten, fled, or dead from something worse. Now, when something howls at night, it isn't from the woods, it's from the edge of the village, behind the mill, by the river, deep and human, and not quite sane. Last night, someone saw a figure dragging something heavy into the trees. They didn't follow. They closed their shutters and added more ash to the fire, because sometimes it's better not to know. There's a woman who lives alone now at the edge of the commons. They say her husband vanished, that her children never made it through the summer, but she has food, always has food. She says she forages, finds mushrooms others miss, knows where the nettles grow. No one believes her, but no one accuses her either, because if the whispers are true, she's too dangerous. And if they're not, she's just a woman eating in a world where everyone else is starving. You pray less these days, or maybe more, but the prayers are different now. No longer requests, no longer bargains, just muttered syllables, words repeated because silence feels too final. The priest says the soul can endure anything. You're not sure. You think maybe the soul is like bread. Left out too long, it just molds. This isn't about hunger anymore. Not really. The body can starve and still cling to hope. But something else is dying now. Something deeper. You've watched your neighbors dig up corpses. You've seen children steal from their mothers. You've let someone die because you wanted their coat. And somewhere in all of this, the line between survival and savagery faded like smoke in the rafters. What's left now? Not law, not church, not God. Just you, and your knife, and whatever you still have the stomach to do. There was a time when the church bell meant hope. Now it sounds like mockery. The clang used to summon warmth, communion, purpose. Now it tolls through a village half-gutted by grief and mud, through frost-covered fields and homes, where no one lights a candle anymore. It rings once, maybe twice, weakly, like the priest no longer has the strength or the conviction to pull the rope. No one looks up when they hear it. They just keep their heads bowed and their hands buried in their sleeves. You still go to church on Sundays, not for faith, for fire. The stone is cold, but the people are warm, or at least warmer than your hut. It smells like mildew and sweat and burning fat from a single tallow candle sputtering on the altar. The priest arrives late, thin, pale, shaking. He doesn't wear his vestments anymore, just a black cloak and wool mittens. His voice is hoarse, his prayers half-spoken. No one listens anyway. Last year, the chapel was full. Now there's space for everyone, and no reason to be there. No sermons worth remembering. No hymns, just whispers. People cough, children whimper. Someone threw up last week beside the holy water font. The priest didn't even react, just kept reading, eyes darting from the page like he no longer believed the words were meant for this world. The saints on the wall are cracked and faded. Their faces have peeled away with the damp. The Virgin's smile is gone. The crucifix is tilted. The wine has turned to vinegar. The bread has gone moldy. The body of Christ is soft and green. So now, when communion is served, it's only a gesture. The priest holds nothing, says everything, and passes invisible salvation from one pair of chapped hands to the next. You accept it because it's a ritual. Because rituals are what people do when everything else is broken. There used to be confession lines. Now the door to the box stays open. The seat is empty. The wood is warped from moisture. No one has confessed in weeks. Not because there's no sin, but because there's too much of it. Too much to fit between a priest and a penance. What does forgiveness even mean when your neighbor is boiling boots? When your cousin stole your last turnip? When you lied about burying your own daughter so no one would ask why she vanished? The weight of guilt has become too heavy to carry. So most people just drop it and walk away. The flagellants arrived, at dusk, barefoot and bleeding. They came from the north, 27 of them, dragging wooden crosses, chanting prayers in broken Latin. Some wore crowns of thorns. Most had backs that looked like ploughed fields whipped raw, swollen, still bleeding. They said the famine was punishment, that only suffering could cleanse the world, that God was watching and waiting, and that the rest of us weren't doing enough. They marched through the village. No one joined them. No one stopped them either. By dawn, they were gone, but their blood remained, smeared on the stone, like paint from a ritual no one understood anymore. The priest has stopped offering last rites. There are too many dying, and not enough oil. Now when someone is close to the end, the family wraps them in blankets, says a prayer, and waits. When they die, they are buried quietly, sometimes without a marker, sometimes without even their name. Last week, a man died in his sleep and wasn't found for 2 days. By the time the priest was told, he didn't even ask who it was. He just sighed and said, "I'll come if I can." He didn't. They buried the man beside the others, in the snow, with a broken rake for a cross. They burned a chapel 2 villages west. Some say it was lightning. Others say it was anger. That someone finally snapped. That the priest had taken grain from a dying child, or refused to bless a stillborn, or simply kept preaching while the pews filled with corpses. It doesn't matter. What matters is that no one mourned it. What matters is that when the flames rose, the villagers gathered to watch and said nothing. Because the church no longer feels like a shelter. It feels like a story from a world that no longer exists. People speak of apocalypse now, not loudly, not directly, but in the way their voices trail off, in the way they glance at the sky like they're waiting for something to fall rain, fire, judgment. The old woman who used to warn of sin now mutters about comets, about the stars moving wrong, about horses without riders and a red moon rising. You don't believe her, but when she speaks, you don't laugh either, because these days, no one laughs. The faith is still here, but it has changed. It no longer sings. It hides. It doesn't ask for miracles. It just begs for less. Less rain, less hunger, less pain, less death. You still fold your hands before bed. You still whisper to the dark, but you no longer expect an answer. You just hope that if there is a God, he's too ashamed to look down. There was no war, no banners flown, no armies clashing at the gates, no horns, no siege towers, no battering rams. And yet Europe's great cities fell. London, Ghent, Cologne, Rouen. They didn't collapse in flames or in conquest, but in silence, quietly, from within, as if their bones had rotted under their own weight. The capitals of commerce, of cloth and coin, and grain reduced to damp, stinking husks, not from fire, not from sword, but from the thing they could not expel, death. You arrived in London after 4 days on foot. A merchant told you there would be food here, that the city had grain ships in the docks, and monks with cheese and warm bread. You believed him, or rather you wanted to believe him. You reach the city wall in the grey dawn. It rises above you, cracked and mossy. The guards are still there, but they don't ask your name. They don't ask anything. They barely glance down. One of them is coughing. You think he might be asleep with his eyes open. The gate creaks open for a cart full of salted hides. You slip in behind it. And that's when the smell hits you. It folds around your face like a wet cloth. Stale beer, smoke, feces, and beneath it, all rot. Not the rot of fruit or old meat, the rot of people. Bodies lie along the edges of the streets, not hidden, not buried, just there. Some curled in doorways, some collapsed in motion, one arm outstretched, faces turned upward like they were surprised. Most are covered in rags, dusted in frost or filth. Some are children. You step around them, carefully. Not because you're afraid of disease if it hasn't found you by now, it will soon enough, but because stepping on the dead still feels wrong. Even now, you reach a square. Maybe it was once a marketplace. It still is, in a way. A woman stands by a broken cart, selling something that might be bread or soap. A man offers rat meat, strung like sausages. Another hawks a stew that smells like boiled leather and lies about it being goose. Their eyes are wide and watery, their voices flat. They do not shout, they do not smile. The square is full of people, but not full of life. No music, no dogs, no laughter, only footsteps and wind. And somewhere in the distance, a child crying like it forgot how. The guards are useless. Their coats are torn, their boots cracked. One carries a halberd made of rust and splinters. They no longer enforce laws. They enforce space, keeping the dying from piling too high in front of the guild houses, beating back the hungry from the bakeries that still serve the wealthy. Thieves run past with sacks of grain. No one chases them. A man is stabbed in broad daylight over a bowl of beans. People watch, then walk on. There are no trials now, only reactions. You find an alley with fewer bodies than most, and try to rest. It's hard. The walls weep with damp. The ground is cold and sticky, but it's quiet. Until a cart rolls past, pushed by two boys no older than 15. The cart is full of limbs, arms mostly, legs, one head turned sideways, eyes gone. You don't ask where they came from. You don't want to know where they're going. The boys whistle. That's the worst part. The whistling. A church stands crooked on a hill. You climb to it, hoping for shelter, or warmth, or faith. Inside, the pews are filled with bodies. Some wrapped, most not. The priest sits slumped at the altar. His robe is stained. His mouth moves, but no sound comes. A young man near the pulpit breathes heavily, sweating, clutching his ribs. You don't stay long. There's no sanctuary here, only storage. A nobleman's cart rolls through the upper district. His cloak is clean, his horse fat. He's flanked by men with pikes and polished boots. He passes starving families. One woman screams, throws a turnip at his wheels. The guards beat her with the butts of their spears. The cart doesn't stop, and that's how the city breathes now. Like a beast with one fat lung and 1,000 shriveled ones gasping beneath it. Disease moves faster than hunger now. It rides on rats, on hands, on barrels of water and scraps of cheese. People drop mid-step. They say it's a cough, others say it's fever, or pox, or something new altogether. Whatever it is, the grave pits are deeper than ever, and still not deep enough. They've stopped covering them. They just add more, and hope the cold holds long enough to keep the flies away. Night comes early. The city doesn't sleep. It groans. Flickering torches light the main roads. But most streets are black, save for the occasional spark of flame from a hut or the echo of boots on stone. You pull your cloak tight. Something scurries past Yulo, fast. Not animal, not quite human either. You keep walking. You don't look back, because in a city that has forgotten the living, the dead aren't the worst thing anymore. It's harvest time again, or it should be, but there's nothing to harvest. The fields are not golden, they're black, waterlogged, sour, covered in mildew, as if the earth itself has turned against the people walking on it. Grain that did sprout never reached maturity. Stalks collapsed under their own weight, smothered by the endless rain. Roots rotted before they thickened. Blossoms never became fruit. The year is 1317. and this is the third bad harvest in a row. No one remembers what a full granary looks like anymore. No one expects to see one again. The seed grain is gone. What hadn't been stolen by rats or soaked in the cellar was eaten months ago. People had no choice. When the last of the barley was boiled into thin soup, the next year's planting season was quietly abandoned. The soil lies bare, or flooded, or overrun with weeds. The plough horses are gone, either dead or eaten. The oxen too. No strength left to break the ground, even if it were dry, even if it were worth planting. And the men? Most don't have the strength to lift a spade, let alone turn a furrow. This is no longer a matter of labor. The land is tired. The people are tired. Even the weeds are struggling. You walk the village perimeter and see it everywhere. Fruit trees, bare and brittle. Chickens, long vanished. Gardens that once produced cabbage and onions now lie flattened, trampled by desperate feet or drowned in standing pools. You crouch down and dig into the mud with your fingers. You're not looking for food anymore. You're looking for signs. A sprout, a worm, anything that suggests life. But there's only sludge. It stinks. Like rot, like hopelessness. You wipe your hands on your cloak, and the mud stays under your nails for days. The bread has changed again. If you can find any, it's not really bread. It's a dense, sour lump of mashed acorns, lichen, sawdust, and ground bark. Bits of rye, if you're lucky. It turns to glue in your mouth. Children gag on it. Some households mix it with powdered bone. No one asks where the bones come from. You eat slowly, staring at the loaf like it might turn back into something edible if you just imagine hard enough. It doesn't, but at least it fills the stomach for an hour or two. Then the hunger creeps back, like smoke under the door. You dream of meat, boiled pork, fried goose, just the smell of its skin crackling, juices hissing on a spit. But when you wake, your mouth is full of blood from gnawing your own tongue in your sleep. You spit it into your sleeve and say nothing. Your wife does the same. Neither of you asks the other what you dreamed. You both know fodder is gone. The few animals that remain are kept under lock and key, guarded like treasure. Cows eat straw mats, and even those are shredded and scarce. Goats nibble mold off stone walls. Chickens pick through manure piles for grubs. They look at you like they know their days are numbered. You look back with guilt and hunger in equal measure. The grain traders don't come anymore. Why would they? There's nothing left to sell. The roads are impassable. Bandits roam freely. And the people who once lined up with coins in hand now have nothing to offer but rags, children, or promises. A merchant was seen last month. He came with oats. Real oats. People ran into the road, offering heirlooms, even bodies. He turned around before reaching the village. Someone threw a stone. Someone else said he deserved worse. But you don't blame him. Not really. This year, the hunger is quiet. There are no more riots, no more screaming at markets, no more fights over stale loaves. Just stillness. And waiting. Like the whole world is holding its breath, hoping the next sound isn't the rattle in your throat or your child's blank. You count ribs now, without shame. You measure weeks by funerals. And every time the wind changes, you wonder if it's blowing in plague. Because something else must be coming. The famine can't end like this. It can't just fade. Your neighbor died yesterday. He wasn't old, maybe 30, but he hadn't stood up in weeks. His eyes were yellow, his fingernails had curled. When they found him, he was clutching a spoon. There was nothing in the bowl. They wrapped him in cloth and buried him behind the barn. No prayers, no priest. There's no point pretending anymore. The harvest is gone. The barns are empty. The animals are bones. The people are ghosts. The year is 1317. and there is nothing left to reap. It doesn't stop with a sign. There's no trumpet, no sudden blue sky, no shaft of divine light breaking through the clouds. Just silence. One morning, you wake and realize it isn't raining. The thatch above your head doesn't drip. The mud in the doorway is no deeper than yesterday. The air is still. You step outside, and the sky is a color you haven't seen in over 2 years. Dull gray, yes but dry. The wind smells of wet grass, not decay. You look up, half expecting to be struck for noticing. But the clouds just drift. The rain has stopped. It's spring again, but it doesn't feel like life is beginning. It feels like the end of something you can't name. Your hands are shaking. Not from cold though, it's still cold, but from something else. From the memory of hunger, from the weeks spent chewing bark and boiled shoe leather. From the look in your wife's eyes the day she gave her bread to the baby and said, "I'm not hungry." From the smell of your brother's body after 3 days in the cottage. From the sound of the dirt hitting the cloth you wrapped him in. You survived, but you are not whole. Your ribs still ache when you breathe. Your knees crack when you move. Your teeth are loose. You dream of gnawing, always gnawing, at something that never fills you. You survived. That's what people say now, like it's a prize. You're not sure it was worth winning. The fields are still there. Sort of. Overgrown, gutted, trampled. The fences rotted or broken. Tools rusted where they were dropped. Someone left a plow half buried in the muck. Wood has swollen, the metal bent. There are weeds growing out of the seat. You walk the perimeter. Try to remember where the rows were, where you used to plant cabbage, where the barley grew, where your daughter used to chase chickens. She's gone now. So are the chickens. No one has the strength to plow. Even if you had the seed, even if the oxen had survived, even if you knew the ground would yield, your hands can't grip the handles. Your back folds in half when you try to lift the hoe. You sit down in the grass. It's the first time you've sat outside in months. You used to listen to birdsong this time of year. You hear nothing now but wind and flies. The village is quieter than it should be. At least a third are gone. Some buried, some vanished, some simply walked into the woods one day and never returned. The houses stand empty, doors swinging open, chimneys dark. A girl sleeps in the hollow of a tree, wrapped in a sackcloth blanket. She hasn't spoken since her mother died. She doesn't cry, either. The baker stopped lighting his oven. The church no longer opens. The blacksmith hasn't touched a hammer since his son was taken by fever. The village is still here, but it isn't alive. It's something else now. A grave that breathes. A rider passed through last week. Said the roads were opening again. Said merchants were moving. Said towns were restocking. Said ships from France had reached the southern ports. No one believed him. Not because it wasn't true, but because truth doesn't matter anymore. Hope feels like a trick, like a story told to children. You nod and let him speak, and then go back to gnawing on your fingers, because sometimes that feels safer than thinking about bread. You've started hiding food again, even though there's almost nothing left. A crust here, a dried turnip, a handful of peas wrapped in cloth. It's instinct now. Bury it, hide it, keep it from your neighbors, your cousins, even your own children. Because you don't believe this is over. Not really. The rain stopped, yes, but you still flinch at the sound of thunder. You still wake in the dark with your mouth open, starving from a dream. You don't trust the sun. You don't trust the soil. You don't even trust your own body to carry you through another season. They say the famine is ending, that the weather has turned, that the worst has passed. They say next year will be better, but you don't know what better is anymore. You've seen what people become, what you became. You saw a man roast a dog. You watched your neighbor steal a corpse from the ditch. You let your own brother die, so there'd be more soup for the rest. And that's the thing no one talks about. Yes, the famine ends. But the hunger stays. In the bones. In the dreams. In the soul. The famine is over. That's what people say now. There's food again. Not much, and not everywhere, but enough. Enough that the markets smell of bread again, even if it's coarse and half stone. Enough that people plant with something like hope, even if their hands still tremble when they scatter the seed. Enough that the dead are finally staying dead, instead of piling up outside the chapels. But no one feels like celebrating, because when the rain stopped, when the sun finally broke through, the people who emerged from their hovels and huts were not the same ones who had gone into them. You lived, but you were not whole. You notice it in the children first. The ones born in the famine years are smaller, their limbs thinner, their skin looser, their cries quieter. Some never speak. Others scream at the sight of boiling pots. A few still suck their fingers long after weaning, not from hunger, but from memory. A village girl has a stomach that won't hold anything down. A boy walks with a limp no one can explain. A toddler has teeth like chalk, crumbling as soon as they come in. They are not sick. They are not cursed. They are just marked. By months in starving wombs, by bones built on sorrow, by milk that never came. You sit at table now and still eat with your hand shielding your plate. No one is reaching for your food. No one has to fight anymore. But your body doesn't believe that yet. You chew too fast. You hide leftovers in your sleeves. You measure the pantry with your eyes 3 times a day, even if it's full. Because you remember when it wasn't. You remember empty sacks and cracked jars, the sound of your stomach turning inside itself, the smell of boiled bark. And no matter how much you eat now, there's always something inside you still empty. Something that never left the winter of 13, 17. They say people are acting strangely now, that some won't speak of the famine at all, that others can't stop. That entire villages have begun performing rituals whispered prayers before meals, bowls left out at night for the lost, bread broken and buried in the fields to feed the dead underground. The church says it's heresy, but the priests weren't there in the worst of it. They didn't watch their neighbors chew old leather. They didn't see mothers dig shallow holes and whisper to the ground. So the people don't care what the church thinks. They just want the ghosts to be quiet. New songs are sung in the fields now. Low, rhythmic chants. Some in Latin, some in no language at all. Mothers hum them to newborns. Old women murmur them into cauldrons of soup. You hear one, bone and bark, rain and stone. Bless this root and flesh and bone. Children chant it when they play. They toss rocks into baskets and call them rat meat or God's bread. They play dead in the road. They joke about eating dirt. You want to stop them, but how can you? They're only repeating what they saw, what they lived through, what they now carry inside their laughter. You look around and notice something odd. People don't leave food out anymore. Not even scraps for pigs or chickens. Nothing is wasted. Even the ashes from the bread oven are swept into the garden. Someone said it keeps the worms away. Every crumb is sacred now. Every meal a negotiation with fear. Even the rich who hearlock their pantries and sleep beside them. When strangers pass through, they ask why everyone here is so thin. You tell them you were sick, or that the harvests were poor, or that it was a cold winter. You don't explain. You don't say the word famine. Most don't anymore. It tastes bad in the mouth, like old milk, like graveyard dirt. But you all still see it in each other. The gaunt faces, the quiet chewing, the way everyone flinches thunder rolls in. No one has forgotten. They've just learnt how to pretend they have. Sometimes you think you see her, your daughter, standing by the tree, sitting at the hearth. Just the edge of her, just a flicker, just enough to make you turn and reach. She's not there, but for a moment, you're back in that spring. The thaw, the burial, the hole in the field. You shake it off, you gather firewood, you peel turnips, but the hunger is still there. It just moved, from your belly to your bones, from your mouth to your memory, from the field into the soul of the village. The famine is over, but nothing is quite right. The rains have stopped, but the ground feels brittle. The skies are blue, but people still squint upward like the storm is hiding behind the sun. You survived. Yes, but the hunger did too. The famine has ended, or at least the dying has slowed. The fields are green again, in patches. The markets buzz faintly. Children chase dogs down the lanes instead of rats. There are even weddings again quiet, spare, and joyless, but real. And now the church returns. Or, rather, it stands up straighter, unfolds its arms, picks up the censer and the staff, and starts walking through the villages like nothing happened. The bells ring again. Mass is daily. The tithe baskets come out. And for the first time in living memory, people hesitate to fill them. The bishop comes on horseback. He smells of lavender oil and salt-cured pork. His robe is spotless. His boots don't touch the ground. He's flanked by men with gold-stitched gloves and the clean kind of faces that say, "I never missed a meal." You watch from the crowd as he blesses the fields, sprinkles ash water on the doorposts, and tells the farmers to give thanks for the bounty to come. Someone spits, not loudly, just enough. The bishop doesn't notice, but you see the look pass through the crowd, silent, sharp. It's not blasphemy, it's memory. Where was God when the broth turned to ash? Where was the priest when you buried your second child in a frozen field, with no psalm, no oil, just dirt and a rock? Where was the blessing when people boiled shoe leather and called it a feast? People used to line up for confession. Now the booths are empty. The sin was survival, and everyone shared in it. What penance do you assign for stealing from a corpse? Or praying with your mouth full of weeds? No one wants absolution anymore. They want answers. The priest doesn't have them. So fewer and fewer come to Mass. The monastery up the hill is untouched. Its garden still blooms, its hens still lay, its stone walls still glisten with rain, not rot. People remember what the monks did during the famine. Or what they didn't do? How the bell tower rang twice a day for prayers, even as the villagers clawed the ground for roots. How the abbot said, "God helps those who help themselves," and bolted the gate. How a sack of grain disappeared from the tithe barn, but none was shared. You heard the rumors that the monks ate meat through the worst of it, that they buried their dead secretly, that they bought their survival with silver and scripture and silence. Now, the gate is still closed, but there are watchmen on it, and not for the devil. In the taverns and at the markets, the talk has changed. God is still mentioned, but not with reverence. Now it's sarcasm, bitterness, half-jokes, and mumbled curses. A man sneezes and says, "Must be God's will." A woman loses her bread and says, "Guess I'm being tested again." No one laughs. A few villages have stopped sending tithe entirely. Others tithe in stones or spoiled barley, just enough to make the point. The archdeacon in Lincoln declared it heresy. The people in Lincoln stopped coming to his sermons. Stranger things are happening too. Wandering preachers, lean men with cracked voices now gather crowds in the forest. They speak of visions, of fire falling from the stars, of churches built on rotten bones. One woman claims the famine was God's punishment for the church's greed. She stands barefoot in the mud and weeps for the dead, then sells bits of ash as holy. people believe her. Others whisper of a boy who was never fed, but survived. They call him the Hollow Saint. He walks from town to town, blessing empty bowls. When people wake, they say they feel full. You know it's nonsense. But then again, you saw stranger things during the famine, and at least the boy shows up. The church now talks of rebuilding faith, of re-cleansing the land, of gratitude and gratitude and gratitude. But it no longer rings true. When the priest raises the host, fewer kneel. When the bells toll for mass, fewer come. When the sermons stretch too long, people leave quietly, with heads down but not ashamed. Because the church may have survived the famine, but it failed the people during it. There is still belief, yes, but it's changed shape. Less about saints, more about fire. Less about obedience, more about protection. Shrines appear in barns, small idols carved from bone. Candles lit for unknown gods, some with faces, some without. A child leaves an offering to Mother Soil. A farmer prays to the Lord beneath the roots. You don't tell the priest, because maybe these gods listened, and that's more than can be said for the last ones. You still go to church sometimes. You still bow your head. You still recite the Lord's Prayer. But you never ask for rain. You never ask for bread. You never ask for help. You learned better. Now, when you pray, it's for silence, for stillness, for the wind to pass over your roof without howling, for the rats to stay far from the granary, and for the bells to ring only once. Because twice means someone died, and 3 times means it's starting again. You used to pray for rain. Now, when the clouds gather, you shut the shutters and light a candle. Even in spring, even when the thatch is dry and the wells are low, because rain no longer means life. It means memory. The famine is over, they say. The land is healing. The wheat is sprouting. The sun is returning. But no one trusts the sun anymore. Not really. Too much sun and the soil cracks. Too much sun and the rivers shrink. Too much sun and the famine doesn't come with water, it comes with fire. It turns out hunger has many faces, and one of them is heat. You wake at night sometimes because of the wind. It whistles through the cracks in the cottage wall, brushes the ash in the hearth, rattles a pot just enough to sound like a footstep. You lie there, heart thudding, listening not for thieves, not for wolves, but for the storm you're sure is coming. Sometimes it does. And when it does, your whole body clenches. You've learned to count the seconds between lightning and thunder, like a priest reciting verses. You don't sleep during storms anymore. You watch the roof. You touch the walls. You brace for the next 2 years to vanish again. The old men say the sky changed after 1315. That the clouds look different now. That they sit heavier. That the wind doesn't blow quite right. That the birds fly lower than they used to. You laugh when they say it. But you still check the sky 3 times a day. Morning, noon, dusk. You squint at the horizon. You sniff the breeze. You stare at clouds as if they might be planning something. Because sometimes it feels like they are. Like the rain didn't just come by accident. Like it meant to ruin you. Farmers plant again. Of course they do. But they plant differently now. No one trusts a single field anymore. Crops are scattered across hillsides, hedgerows, between tree roots and beside graves. Seed is hidden in leather pouches, not stored in barns. A few even bury it beneath chicken coops who'd steal seed from beneath chicken shit. There's less talk of harvests, more talk of backup. And even when the shoots come up green and strong, no one smiles. They just watch the sky, as if waiting for it to change its mind. There are rituals now, unspoken things people do to keep the weather calm. An old woman sprinkles salt on the windowsill before bedtime to dry the rain before it falls, she says. A boy leaves a crust of bread on the fence every Thursday for the wind, he explains. A whole village kneels whenever the sky turns yellow before dusk. It's not religion, not quite. It's fear, shaped into habit. People speak to the sky in low voices now, not praying, not begging, just warning it. When the weather is fair, it feels like a trick. The sun is warm, the breeze is kind, the air smells of cut hay and lilacs. And still you don't trust it. You look at the sun and think, you've lied before. So you keep the cellar stocked, you keep the cloak near the door, you sleep with your boots on, just in case you need to run. You used to dream of sunny days. Now you dream of roofs collapsing, of rain that never stops, of fields turning black again, over and over. You wake up, sweating. You touch the walls again, still dry. For now, the children have never known a stable season. They call it sky sickness, a local joke. When a sheep is born and dies in the same stormy week, the boys laugh and say, "Bad case of sky sickness." But their laughter is tight, bitter. They've seen too much. Their lives began in hunger, and they're being raised by people who jump at thunder. They don't believe the weather is just weather anymore. They believe it has moods, and vengeance, and memory. And maybe they're right. Because even the crows don't land when the sky turns the wrong color. Your neighbor builds his fence twice as high. Says it's for wolves. But there haven't been wolves here in 20 years. You both know it's not about wolves. It's about the helplessness. The idea that the sky can walk into your home, pour through your ceiling, rot your food, and leave your children crying in the dark. You can't fence the sky, but you try anyway. You remember the old rhyme, something your mother used to say when the clouds rolled in. Red in the morning, shepherd's warning. Red at night, the children cry. That wasn't how it went, you're sure. But it's how you remember it now. Because when the sun sets red, the children ask if they need to go hungry tomorrow, and you don't know how to answer them. So you tell them to eat while it's warm, to sleep while it's dry, to pray if they want to tow but not too loud. You don't want the sky to hear, not just yet. They call you old now. You hear it in their voices. The soft deference, the way children stand up when you enter, the way younger women ask you how to keep carrots through winter, or how much barley to plant before the frost hits. Your hair is thin, your hands are cracked leather, you haven't run in years, not since your knees began sounding like snapped twigs, but they still look to you. Because you are one of the few who remembers what it was really like. The famine, the long years, the dark, the wet, the hunger that folded itself into your bones and stayed there. And though you never speak of it without a reason, they know. They can see it in the way you cut bread. Slow, precise, as if every crumb matters. Because to you, it still does. The famine ended decades ago, but its fingerprints remain on everything. Wagons carry more salt than ever now, not for taste for storage. Every home has a root cellar, even the ones with no roots. People trade jars of pickled beets like coin. Children are taught how to dry mushrooms before they learn to read. Rain no longer brings relief. Too much sun is feared. A foggy morning is whispered at like a bad omen. The seasons haven't betrayed you again, not yet. But no one dares assume they won't. Because you remember when the sky stopped feeding you. And the memory has teeth. They think you're odd, sometimes. The way you save bones. The way you keep a stale loaf in the rafters, just in case. The way you measure seed grain 3 times, and still plant with one hand over your heart. You talk to the pantry. You thank the oven. You never leave the last spoonful in the pot. And when the wind howls from the west, you do not sleep. You sit up in your chair, wrapped in wool, staring out at the fields, counting. Not sheep, not stars. You count how many days of food are left in the house. You count how many mouths it must cover. You count the risks. Because the next storm might not bring rain. It might bring memory. Your grandchildren don't understand. They laugh when they waste crusts. They toss apple cores. They say things like, "We'll just get more," as if food comes from shelves and not from earth. You never scold them, not harshly, but you do watch them, you do tell stories. Not the whole stories. Not the ones with the dead in the streets or the rats boiled for supper, or the time you saw a woman leave her child in a snowbank because there was no more milk and no more fire. But stories. Enough to make them stop and think. Enough to plant a seed. We didn't always have so much, you say. There were winters where hope weighed more than bread. And they go quiet. Just for a moment. The church never truly recovered. Yes, the masses continue. The bells still ring. The incense still burns. But people pray differently now. They pray with one hand open and the other gripping a shovel. They ask less for blessings and more for warnings. Superstition is everywhere. Not because people are foolish, because people remember. There are symbols carved into barn doors. There are onions braided with string and bones. There are coins buried at field corners, and small dolls left beneath hearthstones. Not for beauty, for safety. You don't scoff. You leave offerings too, just in case the land is listening. There is a man in the next village who speaks of numbers, of patterns, of the moon and the cycles, and the way famines come in 3s, or 8s, or 7s. You don't know if he's right, but you listen, because the last time no one listened, people died. You never want to be that deaf again. You collect information the way you collect mushroom, scarefully, suspiciously, and you store it away. Not because you plan to use it, but because, maybe, someday your granddaughter will ask, and you'll have an answer? Because when the storms come, and they always do, someone must remember how to bend, not break. There is food now, there is water, there is warmth, and fire, and music, and meat. There are feasts again. But every feast feels borrowed. Every full cupboard feels temporary. Every around the table carries a shadow. Because you remember what it was like to have nothing. And once you've known that emptiness, it never truly leaves. It just gets quieter, until a shadow crosses the sun, until the wind rises, until the rain forgets to stop, and then it wakes again. That voice in the back of your skull, that rumble in your stomach that isn't hunger, but fear, the one that says, "You survived it once, but will you again?" You know how it starts, so pay attention. The next storm is always coming.